How's it going? Good morning. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to bore you with a lengthy speech which has been prepared by someone else, but I am going to talk to you this morning about this enormous opportunity that Australia has on cryptocurrency and on digital assets more broadly. And the reason that I've always been of the view that this is a great opportunity for Australia, that sounds bad, is because of the nature of our economy here in Australia, where we have a small number of large companies which have very large levels of market concentration. And so I've always thought that the value of the disruption that can be delivered by this particular form of technology is always going to be of great virtue, and that's why it should be taken seriously by Canberra. And that's why when we were in government, we moved very quickly on this issue. Back in 2021, which sounds like an eon ago, I completed the first report into cryptocurrency by the Senate, and within just 1 month, it had been through the federal cabinet process, and the Australian government had a detailed policy on crypto, which many of you will know about. Fast forward to the 2022 election, and you may recall that the coalition lost that election, probably an election we deserved to lose. And in that election campaign, the Labor Party promised that they would progress the agenda that we had championed. But as you also now know, that has not materialised. And what we now have is a massive stagnation on crypto regulation in Australia. We've gone from being at the top of the pack in terms of having a detailed plan for leadership, and we're now down towards the bottom. And just to step through that, so back in 2022, Stephen Jones, the Minister for this area, promised that Labor would progress this agenda very quickly. And in fact, even after the FTX collapse, Jim Chalmers, the Treasurer, said that following the spectacular collapse of FTX, the government will embark on a program of cryptocurrency reform. So that was a quote from October last year, and since that time, there has been absolute crickets. So before the election in March 2022, we released a discussion paper from the Australian Treasury, which Josh Frydenberg released, which was designed to election-proof this agenda. Now, that was my plan, and it has failed miserably, mainly because Labor did not take the agenda seriously. And also, I have to say, in a moment of reflection, the industry has not been strong enough to push back on the lack of progress from Canberra. It hasn't been strong like other industries have been, maybe more traditional industries like agriculture and mining, which have had the purchase to push back on Canberra's indolence here. And so, frankly, even despite the massive consumer detriment caused by the collapse of FTX, where 30,000 Australians did their shirts, the government still felt under no pressure and no compunction to do anything at all. So as a result of the government's failure, we introduced a bill into the Senate last year, which is a private senator's bill, which does put forward a regulatory framework for crypto, what I call Gatekeeper style regulation. So it's not designed to regulate every single token. It's designed to put obligations on the gatekeepers, the market operators, the brokers, give them obligations to protect consumers, capital requirements, key personnel tests, the sort of basic financial regulation that you would expect to see for a more mature, or the more mature part of the financial sector. That bill is designed and based on the MICA approach in the EU, where again it's gatekeeper style regulation. But look, it also recognises the fact that Australia is not Robinson Crusoe here, and that I don't believe we should be trying to design bespoke Australian style regulation for what is effectively a global sector. And we need to have regulation which speaks to the nature of this very global industry and the borderless nature of the transactions taking place. So we are where we are. We've had 2.5 years of a very bad government which has failed to deliver anything on cryptocurrency other than a very strange attempt to regulate tax in response to El Salvador changing its policy in relation to Bitcoin. So what has happened in the absence of Canberra being able to deliver anything? What you've seen is the regulator trying to step into the shoes of the legislature, and there has been a large level of, I would have to say, uncertainty, because the regulator's job is not to make the law. The regulator's job is to enforce a law that it is given by the Parliament. And so now what you see is the regulator trying to enforce laws where people have sought to deploy different forms of crypto businesses in a landscape where there's no regulation. So although I have probably been ASIC's greatest critic, I would have to say that in a way I feel a bit sorry for ASIC, because it is trying to navigate a very uncertain terrain where the Parliament has totally abrogated its responsibility to legislate this opportunity for Australia's future, but also, frankly, to insulate the Australian people against the risks of shoddy operators and the risks when things go wrong. So as we wind down this parliamentary term, and I expect there'll be an election within the next 3 or 4 months, we will finish this 3-year period with zero progress. Zero progress. So the only question is, what are the parties going to take to the next election? I know that many of you are involved in trying to emulate the success of the Standing with Crypto groups in the United States. I very much welcome that. I encourage you to put as much pressure on everyone to try and ensure that the Parliament doesn't run another 3 years without any progress, because that is a real risk, that unless the industry gets organised, then there will be a replay of the next 3 years, particularly if it is a hung Parliament, which is a real possibility, where you see every other interest group able to get their agenda up, and this industry again suffering from regulatory malaise. Aside from putting in place Gatekeeper regulation, I know many of you will be interested in what's going to happen on the tax side. And when we were in government, we asked the Board of Tax to do a report on the taxation of crypto assets. Now that report, which was designed to be completed in 2022, did report in 2023. So the government and the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, has had that report for more than 12 months. More than 12 months. And that report has not seen the light of day. So we will be moving a motion in the Senate next week to compel the production of that report so we can see exactly what the Board of Tax has said about the taxation of crypto assets in Australia, because how on earth are we going to make progress if the government is commissioning effectively now secret reports into something as material as to how the assets are going to be taxed? Now, a lot of people have asked about the changes in the United States and the adoption of a policy of Bitcoin as a strategic asset for the United States Treasury. I mean, I think this is a very reasonable idea for us to be discussing here, but we are so far away from being able to have a mature debate about that in this country when we can't even get the basic Gatekeeper style regulation off the ground. So until we can have a more mature debate, I don't see that going anywhere, and frankly that opportunity could be missed. The good news is that we live in a country where we have many, many options. We have a federation of states and territories, and it might just be the case that a mature, clever state jurisdiction, or it could be a territory jurisdiction, maybe even the Northern Territory, decides that it will take a reserve of Bitcoin or a reserve of a crypto asset into its own treasury as an inflation hedge or for other purposes, and frankly the Australian government will again be left wanting. In relation to Central Bank Digital Currencies, I think this presents a great risk to Australia, particularly in the Pacific, where a large group of unbanked people with access to technology like mobile phones could very quickly adopt a Chinese e-yuan as a form of reserve currency, or even as their main currency, their main way of doing business. here in our backyard in the Pacific. You all know that the Pacific is very important to us strategically, and again, this is another example of our vacation of the landscape here is risky for us economically, but also risky for us from a geopolitical perspective. So since we lost office in 2022, you've now seen massive progress in Singapore, the UK, Hong Kong, Dubai, and even the US in relation to the development of crypto as a serious proposition for government. And so the only way to get Australia back on track is to change the government next year. You would expect me to say that, but I think you'd have to say that after 2.5 years of promises and the re-release of consultation papers which occurred back in March 2022 before the election, that the government have totally missed an opportunity for this country and are exposing consumers to wrongdoing each and every single day. I think the government has been lucky that there haven't been more instances of wrongdoing on their watch. And so until there is a change of government in Canberra, I'm afraid that we are locked in the crypto slow lane. So thank you very much, and happy to take any questions if you like. Yep. Yeah. So the question is, I'll try and reflect the question accurately, that the Liberals were in power from 2013 to 22. Why didn't we do more? Why is this all Labor's fault? I think the gentleman also said that he's an LNP voter, which is very good news, so we just need a few more of you, sir. And the answer to the question is that we commissioned the inquiry into crypto back in 2021, and that was the first Senate inquiry. And at the time that it was commissioned, it was one of the only parliamentary inquiries anywhere around the world which had looked at what could be done to regulate it in some form. I mean, at the time, the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, said to me, you know, can you do an inquiry into crypto? I'm like, oh, I suppose. And he sort of made the point that he wasn't sure whether it was good or bad, and I sort of had the same view. So, frankly, you have to give Canberra a degree of latitude here that it's a long way away behind the market and a long way from the market. And so we're always going to be a bit slow to respond to things. But I think we did commission the inquiry. Labor voted against having that inquiry. And once the inquiry was finished in 2021, we put it through the federal cabinet, and there was a detailed policy released subsequently. So I think that was real progress. The other thing I should say is that during the upcoming election, I mean, I would expect that both major parties will actually release a crypto policy. I know that, I mean, this is the risk of departing from your prepared remarks. I was supposed to say that today, but there will be a crypto policy that we will have, and we will be looking to put in place very hard timetables alongside our commitment. So, for example, if we're going to deliver a crypto market or broker style regulatory framework, then we will have a timetable next to that. So I would encourage the Labor Party to do the same thing. I'm not sure whether people will believe it, but that's what we will do. We can only focus on what we can control. I think the question is, what are we going to do on financial inclusion? I mean, look, the main thing we're going to do more broadly on financial inclusion, because we all live in Australia where we've had a history of home ownership. That is slipping away from Gen Zs and millennials. And so we have a very different plan to the government to get home ownership back on track. I know that there are many people here at this conference who want also to find ways to leverage digital assets and home ownership. But we do regard that as a very integral part of the Australian settlement, frankly. And so we will open up super for housing. We're going to announce a policy on changing the lending laws for home ownership, first home buyers, and we will put that at the centre of our offering at the election campaign next year.
Andrew, I've just got a question about this change of government.
Yep.
So with Peter Dutton jumping on board with this misinformation bill, which just flies in the face of everything we stand for here, we're about decentralisation, the right to transact freely, the sovereign right to self-custody, all that sort of stuff, and Peter Dutton just jumps on board with a misinformation bill that is absolutely disgusting on so many levels. It's unbelievable. We hate Albo beyond belief, but how would we change government out for someone who just jumped on board with the worst bill we've ever seen that flies in the face of everything we stand for here? I appreciate your time. This is the second time I've seen you speak, and appreciate your advocacy for what we're doing in our space, and love what you have to say. But there's this huge elephant in the room when we talk about the change of government. Dutton is useless for all of us. He's not going to bring anything to us as far as what we want to see in the cryptocurrency space, blockchain, decentralisation.
Well, I think there's two parts to the answer. The first part of the answer is the misinformation bill would be amongst the worst bills I've ever seen in my life. The idea that the government would appoint a czar, effectively, to decide what's truth and what's not truth is fundamentally jarring in a liberal democracy, and we will never support that bill. So I'm not sure, you may have some different information to me, but we are against that bill, and Peter Dutton has said that we will vote against that bill in the Parliament, and I'm very confident we have the numbers in the Senate to stop that bill from ever materialising. So as far as we are a political party that has life in us, we will be against the idea of appointing a government official to decide what is true and what is not true. Very dangerous idea, I agree with you. On the second issue, we will advance during the campaign a very detailed plan to advance digital assets. That's our policy. So, as I've said today, if we get in, we will deal with it within a reasonable timetable. I'm not going to say exactly how long today, but it'll be expeditious because we know how important it is. We understand the value of what you're doing for the broader community. I mean, we're not in the business of standing up for the entrenched vested interests. One of the reasons we like this agenda is because it's disruptive. It gives consumers new ideas, new concepts, lower prices. So that's always been our way. And frankly, the way I see it is a lot of the cryptocurrency people are effectively small businesses. They're the modern small businesses, and we've always stood for small business in the Liberal Party. You might need the mic. I think we'll go there, then we'll come to you, sir. Yep.
Hey, you briefly mentioned tax.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask if you have any predictions or anything that you're looking at doing for crypto tax. I mean, we look at the UAE, 0%. We look at what the US is introducing policy-wise, potentially 0% on American-owned crypto assets. Do we have a plan to try and avoid the huge capital gains bills that we could all potentially be seeing, even if we do hold for more than 12 months?
Well, the question is whether it is, in fact, an asset for CGT purposes or whether it should be a currency or whether it should be something else. I mean, that's what we asked the Board of Tax to do. So Josh Frydenberg commissioned the Board of Tax to do that exact inquiry. That inquiry was given to the government in the middle of last year, and they've kept it a secret ever since. So it's very difficult for us to arrive at even an alternative policy without having had the benefit of the expert input from the Board of Tax, which we commissioned. So I don't wish to dodge your question, but I think there's a case to be made here that it could be either a CGT asset or it could be a currency, but I'm loath to make any commitments until we see the report and we actually go through a process. So that's why this week I'll be moving a notice of motion to get that report disclosed publicly, and I'll be working on the Greens political party to vote with us. Because if we get the Greens, then we get the numbers to force the production of the document. I'm sure the government will vote against it because despite their commitment in the last election to transparency, they have been anything but transparent.
With regard to, you mentioned policy coming out to make access for consumers more reasonable. What considerations are you going to put in, because the primary friction between consumer and the supplier, the crypto exchange, is the financial institution. They are the primary cause of friction, and they destroy the credibility of the supplier. What have you considered, and what are you going to put in place to put pressure on those people that effectively sit in your back pocket, if you forgive the comment, but a lot of people have that perception, that are the financial institutions which flat out refuse the fiat to crypto conversion to facilitate it?
Yeah, well, I mean, we want this industry to have its own licensing regime so it has the credibility of being able to run its own operation. I mean, we're not proposing that digital assets become a wholly owned subsidiary of the banks and the insurers and the financial establishment. So that's why we proposed frankly, a lighter touch regulatory solution, still with some obligations that you would expect, key personnel tests, whatever, if you want to run a brokerage or a crypto market, because we think that forcing it all under the roof of the existing financial system is not necessarily a good answer. Can I have the mic back, sorry? You have to get the mic, I can't hear you, sorry.
That may be the case, but the resistance of the financial institutions to accept whatever policy, I mean, again, financial services are responsible manager on an AFSL.
Yeah.
So my exchange is moving to that position of being licensed, no guidance, but we're setting up our roadmap to be in that position, and I have no problem attaining that. But there's no guarantees that a financial institution is then going to accept just because we're licensed and reduce the friction between the consumer and us.
I understand. Well, I think, frankly, if it's a regulated business and if the debanking continues, then it's much easier for Canberra to step in and say, well, this is a licensed business, you have no reason not to do business here, frankly. And look, the banks in particular are given an enormous amount of privilege from Canberra because they operate under the 4 pillars policy, they get a bank guarantee, so, you know, we're not giving out all this privilege for nothing. So, I mean, once there is a level of regulation, there are no excuses left. I understand how important debanking has been, and you know, to the extent that I'm involved, we'll make sure that we get our fair pound of flesh. Anything else?
Hi, thank you for your time coming in today. I wanted to ask you, have you been able to personally go and speak to Ed Husic or any other minister in the Labor Party without having to get permission from your party to do so?
Well, Ed Husic is not the minister for these issues. The minister for these issues and the people that have made all the commitments are Stephen Jones and Jim Chalmers. And frankly, they're not interested in your issues. If you were a super fund or a union, you'd probably be at the top of the list. But really, they're not interested. So if it was a priority for them, they would have dealt with it within a year. So there are other people inside the Labor Party that do take an interest in these issues, but most of them are on the backbench. So unfortunately, politics is not a meritocracy. Thank you very much for having me today. Enjoy your Sunday.